It is such an amazing pleasure to be here with all of you today. I would like to give you an overview of what is coming in the world of artificial intelligence, or sometimes called machine intelligence. Especially if my clicker will behave. I seem to be having a few issues with it. Can we connect the clicker, please? There we go. Voila. See, sometimes technology does obey humans. In the past 5 years or so, we have seen amazing developments in the space of machine intelligence. We are now able to replicate a lot of the abilities of human intelligence in machines. And that is a resource that we can use for so many different important problems in our world. But where did it come from? Why is it coming now and not 10 years ago or 10 years into our future? A little bit of it has to do with things like gaming consoles. There we go. Back in the mid-1990s, we started to get gaming consoles, which were doing 3D worlds. Games like Tomb Raider and Quake, etc. And to work with 3D complex geometry, engineers had to come up with new ways of doing computing, which are much more parallel. Instead of working at one problem at a time, they would work at many different problems and then put the answers all together onto the screen. Today, we have very sophisticated graphics, so much more sophisticated than the mid-1990s. And of course, we don't just have this on our gaming consoles, we have this in our smartphones as well. I'm having some real problems with this. If it's possible, if you would be so kind, if you could turn off Wi-Fi on your phone, that would really help me, because the signal is not very strong. If you could help me with that, I would really, really appreciate it. That will make things go so much easier. Thank you. So, all of us today have very sophisticated graphics on our smartphones, don't we? And just in the last 5 years, we've seen a 25 times increase in the performance of these kinds of graphics. So, all of this computational power is coming to our pockets, and it is getting very small and very cheap and very low power as well. There we go. This is a tiny little chip. It is smaller than a grain of salt. And yet, it has the ability to connect to wireless networks, to do complex processing, and it has a little solar panel on it that can take energy and use that to drive itself. So you can literally put any one of these little computers in the walls if you wish to. And they only cost about 10 cents US. This is how small and yet so powerful these kinds of technologies have become. And it is enabling new forms of computation, which are about big distributed networks of computers. The biggest supercomputer on this planet isn't owned by the Russians or the Chinese or anyone else. It's owned by all of us. There is more computing ability in the Bitcoin hashing network than the top 500 supercomputers on this planet combined, times 1,000. It is a massive pool of computation. And it's so big that we could probably emulate or run a pretend human brain on this pool of computation if we knew how to do that. This is what computers look like. I'm afraid I'm having a lot of problems with this clicker. It just is not moving ahead. Again, if you could turn off Wi-Fi on your smartphones and on your laptops, I would really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Okay. Next slide, please. Thank you. Of course, computation is only one piece of the puzzle. Even a very intelligent brain is only as good as the experiences that it has to work with. In machine intelligence, we call these experiences data sets. Next slide, please. A lot of the algorithms, these clever little programs which we're using for machine intelligence today, were actually invented back in the 1980s. But it's only in the past few years that they have become useful. The difference is data. As soon as data becomes available, these algorithms, you can take them off the shelf, blow off the dust, and start to use them. And we have a lot of data. Next slide, please. 10,000 years ago, up until the year 2000, all of human civilization, everyone who has ever lived on this planet together, created about 5 billion gigabytes of information. And yet, thanks to the power of the internet, machines helping us to move information around, helping us to process and share information, we were creating the same amount every 10 hours. Next slide, please. So from 10,000 years to 10 hours in 10 years. And today, that same amount of information is doubling roughly every 30 seconds. We are drowning in data. We have so much data. And we can use it to create powerful data sets, sets of experiences for machines to learn about the world, to learn what traffic signs look like, or medical information, or human faces. Essentially, anything that the human brain does in 1 second or less can now start to be replicated by machines. So it's this fast kind of thinking, the kind of thinking we do without really thinking about it, like dancing, for example. What kind of things do our brains do in 1 second or less? We might recognize a person, or transcribe between text and speech, or between languages. We might even look at an object and decide whether it is beautiful or interesting in just that fraction of a second. And if we take that 1 second moment and we put it in a string, we can do things like pilot a vehicle, or make a prediction about what is going to happen next. In all of these areas, machine intelligence is helping us to replicate these kinds of capabilities. Back in the 19th century, we had a revolution in motive power and propulsion, and we used it to cross the continents in steam trains, and in great steam liners on the oceans. And eventually we discovered that we could put some wire around these engines and generate electricity. And at first we just used electricity for lighting and for keeping us warm or cool. And it took time before we recognized that we could do things like use it for radio waves as well, or use it to cook our food through electromagnetism. Today, we are discovering that machine intelligence is emerging as a utility that we can apply to so many different problems, just like electricity. And that's how I would like you to think about it. But it's sometimes a little bit more than just a tool. It's almost like magic. It's almost sometimes like having a genie in a bottle that you can just ask it things and it will make it for you. Some of you might be aware of this idea of monkeys on typewriters. That if you had 1,000 monkeys on a typewriter for 1,000 years, they would eventually recreate the works of Shakespeare or a Mozart concerto. But what this tends to leave out is the idea of giving feedback to the monkeys. And if they write a few words that you kind of like, you can say, okay, that was good. Do something like that again next time. That is what we have today with a new machine intelligence technology called generative adversarial networks. It's basically where you have two AIs that compete with each other, and one is trying to make fake stuff, and the other one is trying to detect fake stuff. And if you do it just right, over time, you can get one of these systems to make things which are extremely believable. Here we see one of these AIs creating more and more believable human faces, right? Step by step by step, over many different attempts, until you end up with something which looks very real, and yet is not. And there has been so much progress in this area in just a few years. Back around 2 years ago, this was the state of the art in this technology. Obviously, these faces are not quite right. They are something you might find in a nightmare or a fever dream when you're very sick. Not very friendly looking. And yet today, this is what is possible. This is the current state of the art. None of these people exist. They're not real, but they sure look real. And there's a fun game that you can play at humanorai.net, where you are asked to guess whether a person is real or is not real. And it's not always easy. Of course, we can do a lot more than just generating faces that look real. These kinds of technologies can turn a sketch, like you might draw on a napkin at lunch, into a realistic 2D or 3D object. And you can apply a style of one kind of image onto another. So, for example, you might take this kind of sketch, like you might create in a very simple paint program, and apply a style of one of the great master painters to it. And if you don't like where this little bush is, you can move it over. Voila. Impressive, isn't it? We can do this with pictures of people as well. We can edit all kinds of things to change an image in just a few seconds. Something that would take a skilled artist days to create, machines can now do in just a few seconds, and quite believably as well. We can also reconstruct entire scenes. This video, for example, of a car driving on a road does not exist. This is not a real place. This town does not exist. All of this was invented, dreamed into existence by machine intelligence. And of course, you can see there are little parts of it that are not quite right. But in just a year or two, this kind of video will be completely realistic. And it will start to be used in place of 3D worlds. So in a few years, your gaming console will have graphics that look this realistic, based on these kinds of techniques. This is a lot of fun, especially for children. We can start to turn reality into fantasy in real time. And we can also have a lot of fun with this as well. By, for example, next slide, please. For example, turning Superman's girlfriend into Nicolas Cage. Kind of creepy, kind of weird. And you might look at this and think, okay, well, this stuff is a toy. This is for fun. But these technologies are going to change so many different industries. These techniques can be used for something called generative design. And it means that you, oh, can we go back one slide? Thank you. It means that we can we go forward with this? There we go, super, thank you. We can start with the end goal in mind, right? So we want to create a bicycle frame, but we don't want it to be too heavy or too expensive, and we want it to be very strong. And these algorithms then can present us with different choices, and we can evolve these over time. We can do this. Thank you. Perfect. We can do this over multiple times as well. So we can start with something obviously made by a human being and evolve it into something that is very biological, very organic looking, and something that no human mind could have created, except maybe H.R. Giger. We can do this, of course, with other things, like biological things. A tooth, for example. We can generate a tooth to match the other teeth and then 3D print that tooth and implant it into the mouth. These kinds of technologies are also helping us to manage our lives and make our communities more safe as well. Here is a technology that can help you to watch the baby during the night. It's kind of like the nanny that watches the baby and will tell you how well the baby is sleeping, or whether the baby is healthy. Maybe the baby isn't breathing very well. This kind of system can alert you and tell you whether the baby is likely to be a little bit in a good mood or not such a good mood. The wonderful thing about machine intelligence technologies is that it's coming away from some server somewhere far away and into your pocket. very cheap devices are now able to run these kinds of technologies on the device itself. And this is creating so many new opportunities for so many different groups in the world. There's a project run by Google over in Brazil where there are tribes who have people coming and taking the trees and cutting them down. And they're not supposed to do that, but they do it anyway. But what they're doing now is taking cheap smartphones and connecting them to a solar panel, like one of those over there, but a small one, and then throwing it up into a tree. And these devices can then listen for the sound of chainsaws or other kinds of noises associated with logging. And when they hear that, they send a text message, beep beep, to the tribal leaders who can then come and defend their lands. In other parts of the world, in India and in Kenya, in Africa, these kinds of technologies are helping people to recognize different plants or to tell whether a plant is healthy or is not healthy, and to give advice on that. Other technologies are able to pinpoint where people might be getting sick. So to look at the behaviors of different people, like whether they have been lying in bed for a couple of days, even without those people needing to report that they are sick. And so just from that information, they can work out where somebody might be giving dangerous food to people. These technologies can also be used to help make our streets and communities safer by listening for the sound of breaking glass or gunshots or that sort of thing. These same technologies can listen to pipes as well, to look for leaks. Because in some parts of the world, up to 30% of the water ends up being lost through these kinds of leaks. But just by listening to them, machine intelligence can help to tell us exactly where that leak is. There are other developments as well, which makes it much more easy and affordable to connect devices to the internet and to machine intelligence. Very cheap devices. There we go. So this is a very simple little device. It's two pieces of metal, and when they touch, a wireless router can detect a very small change in radio waves. And what this means is that you can connect all kinds of objects to the internet and to machine intelligence in a very cheap way, because you don't need electronics. You don't need batteries. Just two very small strips of metal is enough. And so we can put these kinds of devices on a bottle and then know how much fluid has come out of the bottle, because a little ball will turn so many times. Or we can put them on a pill bottle and know how many times that pill bottle has been opened. So many capabilities which are so easy and so cheap. I find this very exciting. Of course, machines can help us to navigate complex environments all by themselves. Today, Google Street View might come through your neighborhood once or twice a year, but soon it's going to be several times a minute. All of these machines capturing information about the world in very deep detail. And we can use these kinds of technologies to do things like run autonomous tractors which can go around fields all by themselves without needing to be controlled manually. And in many ways, a drone is kind of like a flying smartphone. The technologies are almost the same, right? And because these drones now have the same capabilities as smartphones, they can start to fly themselves. Here, this drone is flying through a small forest with lots of trees and objects, and it doesn't need to be controlled by a human being anymore. It can fly itself without hitting anything. And we can use these kinds of technologies to take away landmines out of dangerous areas using these technologies, or to move goods like medical supplies into places where there is not very good infrastructure. Of course, we can use these technologies for mapping an area as well. So we can use a drone image to collect information about a field, which can then be analyzed to tell us where in a field is dry and where is wet, and where the soil has lots of nutrients in it and where it does not. And so these kinds of technologies can help us to save crops from failing, right? Or to improve yields. With all of these machines buzzing around, machine intelligence can start to observe us, to watch us at different times, at different places, and can start to generate a lot of information on us that we might not think that they can do. In the past year or so, we started to see these kinds of new smartphones that have multiple cameras, more than just one camera, right? And these kinds of devices can capture our world in 3D, to take 3D maps of the world, right? And sometimes we can capture information about a 3D object and then edit it in a 3D CAD program and then spit it out back into physical reality through 3D printing, in a kind of a cycle. A few years ago, I created a company based on a new technology for scanning human beings. Now, scanning a room is kind of easy because things don't move. But human beings do move. And it is very difficult to try to capture 3D information about a person because they have to be really still. It's kind of like one of those very early photographs from 130 years ago where you had to be very still for like 30 seconds or else the photograph would not work. I wanted to change this. I wanted to make it easy to capture 3D information from just 2 photographs, one from the front and then one from the side. We started working on the technology, but we found it very difficult to do one thing in particular, and that is cutting the person out of the background. You don't want to be measuring anything behind someone, you just want to be measuring them. And at first we were doing hand coding, hand programming, everything. And we would get one thing to work, but then something else would break. And it was very frustrating. But then came these new techniques in machine intelligence and machine vision. And that made it easy to cut objects out without needing to program anything, just giving it examples and enabling it to learn from that. And this technology solved the problem, and it enabled us to capture 3D imagery of the human body and all of these measurements from just 2 photographs in just 5 seconds. And this kind of technology is now enabling us to create personalized goods and services, to create custom-fit clothing, or to help people to track how their bodies are changing over time. The other nice thing about having multiple cameras is that you can combine slightly different wavelengths of light into one picture. It's a technology called hyperspectral imaging. And it is great for telling you whether your avocado is ripe or not, right? Because you can see underneath without needing to sort of poke at it. But of course, this kind of technology can be used to help us to see inside the human body as well. And so this kind of technology is coming to your smartphone in the next 3 to 4 years. You will be able to do this yourself. Another technology, which I find very exciting, is something called movement magnification. It's about amplifying tiny little movements into big ones. So this is a video. There's not much happening here, but if you amplify the movements, you can see the blood flow through the face, every heartbeat, right? You can watch the blood moving through the face. And so from that, you can take a beats per minute, right? And that can tell you the heart rate of that person. And this is just from a standard video that you might take on your smartphone. And it's great fun to do this with politicians when they get asked a difficult question on TV and you see the heart rate go way up. But we can use this kind of technology to extract audio even from silent videos. So for example, we can point this kind of technology at a plant, right, which is sort of vibrating very small, or a packet of potato chips, right? And we can capture sound. So here, for example, this is a video, and it's just watching the plant, and of course there's sound being played. And then later, we can amplify those tiny movements and reconstruct the sound that was never captured by audio. And so machines can perceive so many things and reconstruct so much information that was never officially supposed to be recorded in the first place. Machine intelligence can even help us to reconstruct pictures that were taken in complete darkness, right? On like a smartphone, for example, it's pure black, there's nothing to see. And yet they can help to reconstruct what that image was. Other technologies can follow people around using wireless technology, so Wi-Fi, even when you cannot see that person physically, right? If they're behind a wall, you can still detect what is going on. And so this is useful for things like people at a concert, where you're not quite sure where all of the people are, if everyone is in the stadium, if there is an emergency situation, or to track people moving around a store, or know whether everyone has left the store when you want to close it, that kind of thing. Other technologies can help to diagnose up to 4,000 genetic conditions in children just by looking at that child's face. There's another technology called right eye, which can predict whether a child is likely to develop autism in children as young as 6 months of age. And just by tracking eye movement, so they put a little dot on a screen and move it, and just by watching how the child follows, they're able to make that kind of prediction. And so machines are able to start to understand us, our personalities, the things that drive us, perhaps even in ways that we don't understand ourselves, right? As we get older, we start to understand more about our own internal processes. And so sometimes machines might know us even better than we know ourselves. There's a good side to this. It means that machines can maybe be useful companions. This, believe it or not, is a robot cat. It costs $99 US, and it's made by Joy for All, which is part of the Hasbro company. Now, at the moment, this cat isn't very smart, but in a year or two, this kind of device is going to get very intelligent, and it's going to be able to know whether your older relative has had a fall, for example, or if they have taken their medication, or maybe they've forgotten, and that kind of thing. And so potentially these kinds of technologies can be a wonderful companion for people. Maybe for people who don't have the ability to take care of a biological pet, you know, as some people do. But this is a little bit utopian maybe, right? Because there's always the other side. We don't want machines which are annoying or get in our way or are kind of creepy. This is not the future that we want to create, is it? And there are many challenges. Because today, only about 50% of traffic on the internet is human beings. The other half is bots, believe it or not. And some of those bots are good, and some of them are not so good. What are the bad bots doing? Well, they are creating spam, you know, like nonsense, or trying to sell people stuff, or they are impersonating human beings and leaving fake reviews. Oh yeah, try the fish, great restaurant, right? Or sometimes they're trying to steal people's information. Or sometimes they're trying to look for a way to attack a person or an organization. And these bad bots are increasing all of the time. And as machine intelligence comes out of the internet and into our pockets and into our devices, we are starting to see machines that lie to us, right? Automobiles, for example, which are lying to us about their effects on our environment. And did you know that statistically, the scandals about these cars, which make more pollution than they pretended to, statistically, that killed about 3,000 people because of the pollution that they created. And we're now starting to see machines that will tell us all kinds of lies. And of course, sometimes even an honest machine can still sometimes just make a silly mistake. So where does this leave us? Is it some horrible battle between humans and machines. I would rather reframe it and think about it in a different way. You see, machine intelligence is a little bit like a very young child. These little machine intelligences are exploring the world like very young children. They are trying to understand the world, and they are trying to understand human beings. And we human beings are sometimes very complicated, aren't we? There is a new kind of field, a new kind of domain of engineering that is a little bit philosophical and a little bit artistic as well. It's called machine ethics, sometimes also called value alignment. So it's about trying to align machines with the things that we human beings might prefer. You remember I told you how data is so very important? That data is perhaps the main reason why machine intelligence is so special today? Well, a few years ago, there was a professor at Princeton called Fei Li. And she and her team created a very important data set called ImageNet. ImageNet was a collection of different images. For example, a car or a cloud or a teddy bear. And having this data set meant that you could test different machine intelligence technologies. And it meant that you could say, well, this new approach is 10% better than the last one. And that was very important. It meant that we could very rapidly create far better technologies than had been possible. In fact, ImageNet is one of the reasons why machine intelligence has come so far in such a short period of time. I am co-founder of a group inspired by ImageNet called EthicsNet. And we are trying to collect examples, not of images, but rather of pro-social behaviors. So nice behaviors, people acting in ways that are kind and friendly. It's not about right or wrong, but rather about behavior that is nicer or more preferable. We're trying to collect things like manners, politeness, congeniality, those ways of interacting with people that make people want to trust and that make people happier and more at ease. I think that if we teach machines this, we can build a society that is happier and that machines don't cause quite so much trouble. They say that it takes a village to raise a child. And I believe it will take a global village to enable the raise of the machines, to enable us to socialize our young machine children, just like our pets and just like our young human children. But where could these technologies take us? Well, I observe that one of the most important things that governments do, or they try to do as best that they can, is the management and accounting of externalities. Externalities is an economics word, and it means when somebody does something that affects somebody else, somebody unrelated. For example, pollution somebody makes some pollution and it affects somebody else. In our society, we don't always account for externalities very well, right? We have increasingly more and more wealth in world society. I think this is great. World GDP is something like $80 trillion. And yet, we also create maybe $1 quadrillion worth of externalities. Species destroyed, land made dirty and unusable, these kinds of things. And we are not accounting for these kinds of externalities very well. We create problems for people who are not even born yet, or who may not be born yet for hundreds of years, and they're going to have to deal with our mess. And so, if these kinds of externalities were part of pricing, then we could pay for these externalities up front, instead of forcing other people to pay for them. I think that this would revolutionize our entire global economy by creating a new market for these kinds of externalities. I think we can do more. I think we can improve trust and communication in human society as well, and make human beings more happy deep inside. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Increasingly in our world, more and more people have these needs, safety and security, physiological needs, well catered for. Our industrial revolution helps us to provide this. But what about the other needs? Love and belonging, self-esteem, self-actualization. Good luck, right? We don't have good ways of helping people to meet these needs. And so we try to meet them in other ways. We try to use our solutions for those lower needs to help us to meet those higher needs. And it doesn't really work very well, not in the long term. What is it that makes human beings truly happy and fulfilled? It's all about our relationships with other people. If you have a good friend that you can lean on when times are tough, and vice versa, you will tend to be very happy. And there is nothing that will make you more sad than a great relationship that, for whatever reason, is no more. Some animals in our world have to eat meat to survive, right? We human beings, we have to form relationships. We are obligately social, and we cannot live alone. We need to develop relationships with others and a good relationship with ourselves as well. We are built to cooperate. We are built to make peaceful communities. That is our natural way, although sometimes it gets interrupted. The first industrial revolution was about augmenting strength, the muscles of animals, the muscles of strong people. The informational revolution, which we are enjoying today, is about augmenting the mind, helping us to process information and calculate and think in new ways. We are coming, I believe, to an augmentation of something like the human heart and soul. And it will come through the confluence, the coming together of these different elements. Machine intelligence to help us to understand the world. Machine economics to help us to align people's incentives and to build trust. Machine economics is things like blockchain. And finally, machine ethics will help us to live happier, peaceful lives and to find solutions to conflict that aren't about one winner and one loser, but are instead about everyone finding a way to win. That is what I believe we are starting to build in the 2020s going forward. There are so many opportunities to build happier, healthier, stronger societies with so much greater trust in them. And we can have it if all of us come together to teach those kinds of nice behaviors to those cold and distant machines. Thank you so very much.